wobbling has changed the sunlight distribution on the Earth such that you have warm periods and cool periods depending on the orbital wobbling. But that orbital wobbling can at most give you about a 2% change in the amount of sunlight. And the sun varies by more than that from decade to decade. So they're really stretching. It's called the Milankovitch cycle. In the biblical model, people like Stephen Oward, who wrote An Ice Age Caused by a Genesis Flood. Is that Ord? Michael Ord. Sorry, I said that wrong. Michael Ord. He's got this idea, and I think it's a great idea, that the oceans after the flood were warm, and the warm oceans caused the Ice Age. Not cold, because cold prevents evaporation. Warm enhances evaporation. So you've got things like the Gulf Stream pumping up billions of BTUs, watts, unit of heat, calories of heat up into the Arctic Ocean. And when it gets up there, well, it's very cloudy. There's a lot of evaporation, maybe a lot of volcanic ash in the atmosphere. So during the Ice Age, the equatorial region is pretty normal. In fact, I think the Sahara Desert was pretty much a tropical rainforest during the Ice Age, from the historical records and the fact that there are alligators or crocodiles out in the middle of the Sahara Desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest water source. In a little hole, a little mud hole, because they got maroon there. Okay, so you get all this heat pumping up into the Arctic, and all this evaporation is coming down as snow. But you've got these really strange things like there's now geological evidence that there was a point in time in history where the Arctic Ocean wasn't frozen over. There's a paper published a year or two ago, looking at the little critters living in the mud, going down, 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 down. Hey, wait a minute, these little critters don't live in ice conditions? Oh, so there's a point in time the Arctic Ocean wasn't frozen over. I think that's during the Ice Age. Oh, wait a minute, wait, I got it right here. Got my whole entire 5-minute. The Ice Age, hey! You can't talk about the Ice Age without talking about climate change. Now, I don't believe necessarily in global warming. However, let's not fall off the horse on the wrong side here. You realize that the Earth's climate does change over time. The Romans existed during what's called the Roman warm period. Their empire collapsed the year the Rhine River froze over. The Rhine doesn't freeze today. Vikings lived on Greenland around the year 100. They lived there for 300 years with farms, in a place where you can't farm today. In the 1600s, it snowed all over Europe in the middle of July, causing mass starvation. It's called the Little Ice Age. And then you have today. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I don't believe in climate stasis, especially when you consider the flood. You ever take a gyroscope and whack it? What does it do? It goes wobble, 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 wobble. Comes back into equilibrium again. The Earth was in equilibrium before the flood. It got whacked out of equilibrium during the flood. I would expect after that it's going to oscillate until it finds a new equilibrium. And I think the climate changes after the flood were more extreme than they are now. I don't know if that's true, but I suspect that. So here's our model. We've got warm oceans, we've got aerosols and volcanic ash in the atmosphere reflecting sunlight back into space, and we've got all this evaporation causing cloud cover. So we've got very little sunshine on the continents. It comes down to snow. We've got abundant evidence that the Earth did have an ice age. So we're in Colorado. Hey, look at that. Colorado was not glaciated. That's crazy. Huh. I would have thought it would have been. Right? That's pardon me, but that's us right there, right? All right. Okay. Sure. All right. Huh. Well, see, I grew up here. Long Island has 2 chains of hills that run for 100 miles. Those chains of hills are what was scraped off of New England. There's a southern chain and a northern chain. The southern chain is where the first glacial event stopped, and the northern chain is where the second glacial event stopped. If it had gone a couple more miles, it would have erased the first. But there's 2 piles of dirt, essentially. That's what I lived on. So there's lots of evidence that there was an ice age. But look at this picture. Here's what I'm getting to answer your question. Here is an evolutionary model of ice accumulation during the ice age. The brown areas are places that are exposed due to the low water. After the flood, water level is about 100 feet higher than it is today. During the ice age, it's about 200 feet lower than it is today. So as people are spreading out across the world, they're building cities on the coasts. A couple hundred years later, when the ice melts, bloop. And I think they're still out there too. So we have all this ice building up. What's missing? What significant area of the world that should have ice on it doesn't? Siberia. This is where tens of thousands of elephants lived during the Ice Age. They're called woolly mammoths. There are islands 100 miles off the north coast of Siberia that are covered in elephant bones. There are islands over here where the natives for centuries have burned elephant bones for firewood because they have a high fat content. There are natives here that every spring, they don't do it anymore because of restrictions on the ivory trade, but every spring they get in their boats and they float north on the rivers, pulling ivory tusks made of ivory out of the riverbanks that had eroded the year before. Not just elephants, though. Foxes, eagles, mice, bunny rabbits, etc., etc., etc. This whole entire ecosystem thrived. You've seen pictures of the caveman hunting the woolly mammoth in the snow. That's false. Elephants can't survive snow. They have to eat too much. If the grass dies, the elephant dies. No, they lived in a temperate zone. They might have migrated up and down a little bit, but this was not frozen over during the Ice Age. And the only explanation I can think of is that the Gulf Stream is pumping up so much heat that the Arctic Ocean isn't frozen over. This is here because the heat, when it first gets up there, it evaporates. By the time it gets over here, it has actually cooled off.